Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season finale of Brea, a great season finale. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Okay, so the timey-wiminess of this all has kind of made my brain scattered a little bit about how the time travel rules work in this, but I'll work you through my process on whether or not, I don't know whether my thinking is correct. Feels like it has to be correct considering how everything goes down, but we'll immediately picking up where obviously the last episode left off, consider we're picking up immediately afterwards. Anyways, it's like, cool, do we pull Gavin off of this, spiking? It's like, no, we can't. Also, the last episode did not do justice on how massive that thing is. It is massive. Like that, you might as well have gotten run through by a broadsword. How thick that thing is at stabbing. You're like, Jesus. And it's not just like, oh, a little bit. It's like, it goes super far out from his, through him. It's like, Jesus, yeah. And they can't move him because if they do, he'll immediately start bleeding. So it's like, okay. And if they do move him, he'd only have minutes. So how do we handle this? Well, luckily, yet unluckily, God, James ended up showing up. And he has the fuel sources. At first I was like, wait, how do you have that? Why do you have that? I was like, oh, I guess you had your own fuel source too. Because I was about to say, it's like, oh, did we see Ty and Levi get here, so how the hell did you get that? Well, we find out pretty quickly how. He stole it from him. I was like, I guess he's been following them ever since they left the village, because he was probably looking for an opportunity. He must have known where Moore must have hidden his fuel source. He must have always known, because Kira knew, so he must have known in some shape or form too. So he was probably just biding his time, waiting for an opportunity, but he found out, like, obviously, he probably saw Levi digging him up, and then it's like, oh, he's there with he probably just never had an opportunity to grab him from Levi and Silas. But nevertheless, Eve and Eve and Izzy decide, hey, we're going to go back in time 4 hours, and they can't, like, while they're back in time, they can't, like, close that portal, open another one, get everyone back home. They can only stay locked onto one destination at a time. So Eve's like, come on, Sam, let me do this. Which Sam's like, no, we got to think about the greater good. Like, yes, I feel bad for Gavin, but there's other people waiting to get home. And it's like, it's that, oh, once again, the greater good kind of having to suffer because of even the family, because the main characters kind of making their unilateral decisions, but Eve and Izzy go, they land, or it's like, all right, we got to find your dad. And I was like, I'm so curious how this is going to work out, because we have not talked about the conversation of, so we're not going to worry about a paradox here, considering the fact that you thought about running into yourselves or anything like that. It's like, I mean, we avoided that conversation entirely, but I'm like, James didn't even give you any heads up because maybe he didn't care enough, but I'm like, I mean, he was focused on doing what he's doing, but I'm like, we're not having that paradox conversation about, like, yeah, don't run into yourself. That's going to cause a whole timey-wiminess of it all. I don't fully know how that would have, once again, the timey-wiminess of, like, they avoided kind of having to explain certain things. Just, it happened. It's like, no, because we haven't seen the timey-wiminess used in this regard. I mean, because obviously, like, the closest we would have gotten is, like, 88. Sam would have run into, like, a younger version of himself, but didn't, so. So the show's been pretty good about trying to avoid the paradox situation to begin with. But either way, Eve and Izzy came across Ty and Levi being basically robbed by James. So now part of me is like, wait, does that mean Levi and Ty died originally? Or is it that Eve and Izzy always come back in time to save them from James? That's super unclear, because the timeline still would have led to them ending up where they did. So it all still would have worked out. So, like, it is that thing where it seems like time is just kind of like aligned with itself of, like, right, because I was like, could they end up dead? But it's like, no, they always end up getting saved by Eve and Izzy. My thought process. And they end up warning Gavin about what's going to happen. It's like, but once again, I'm jumping ahead a little bit because I'm like, timey-wiminess of it all. They do warn Gavin by writing it on the map, but I'm like, yeah, but how do you necessarily avoid that? I guess this type of situation of like he's going to grab, instead of like him just pushing Eve out of the way, he grabs Eve and they both fly out of the way of the lizard's attack. I guess maybe that's the justification for it. Once again, they were super loose with the writing around the explanation for like a lot of that, because like, yeah, it just happens off screen. The timeline just naturally snaps its way back into place. The problem is, present day, not only is Gavin in the process of dying, he's trying to get his father to help fix the machine because it started to break down because water's not getting to the cooling system. But he's like, come on, Dad, please help. He's like, no, I'm not going to. Unless you meet my conditions, which Gavin's like, I'm your son. I'm dying. You made a whole point about family and stuff. He's like, yeah, but he plans to go back to 2075, 2076 to restore, like pick up his work where it was. And it's like, because it's for the grander, yeah, I was so focused on you and family and stuff. It's like, no, I need to be focused more on the greater mission because a lot has been sacrificed because of said family of his. So when that's all said and done, like Gavin wasn't going to give him any leeway. It's like, right, we know how to fix the machine. We need to get the water pumping. So, Judah and Veronica, who's on her way with, Lucas, which we'll get back to that, end up going to try and resolve that situation because Veronica took the pregnancy test, and before she could tell Lucas about it, he was just like, no, we're going to stay here. Not only should we not go back, I'm not going to go back. We should actually stay here. We could do so much. He's like, hey, I can do so much good. If I go back there, I'm just going to ruin everything. And she breaks it to him like, hey, I'm pregnant. He's like, oh. She's like, oh, is that all you have to say? He's like, yeah. She's like, I am going to give you enough time to think of something more comforting to say. And it's just like, it was like, because he was so dead set on like, right, this is what I had to do, what I'm going to do. And now it's like, wait, I have a kid on the way. But then when the time came, he was like, you know what? I'm going to stay here because I'm going to screw that kid up. Like, not only, because if you stick around me long enough, eventually you will get dragged down by me, and I'm going to do the same thing to a kid. I didn't even think about the fact is that until Sam was like, yeah, you're doing that because your dad screwed you up, so you don't want to screw up your kid as well. But it's like, right, we are all capable of change, because he's like, look at me, I'm not a perfect person, but he's like, I know I'm a good dad. So all you have to do is kind of believe in yourself. Like, you've already changed. Like, believe that change is going to stick through, especially knowing, like, right, you love Veronica and you have a baby on the way. You're going to be the best version of yourself, because you're not going to end up like your dad. You're going to end up a lot more like your mom. So, but yeah, his plan was just kind of, it is sad that he wanted to kind of repeat history and kind of be a little bit of a, not even a little bit, a full-blown Debbie Dad. It's like, no, you go back to present day, I'll stay here. Because I get it, it was a situation out of fear. He reacted out of fear, just scared that he would kind of screw things up, all the good in his life. He's like, yeah, I'm like a week into being a better person. Who's to say that won't all come crumbling down the moment we get back? You know? But it's like, hey, have that belief in himself. I think the horse situation probably solidified that too for him, made him kind of doubt himself, because it's like, hey, horses can tell. You know, I love that she, even Veronica's like, whoa. When you suddenly know all this about horses, he's like, yeah, I went to like a family thing, and my parents like dropped me off at like a family thing where like I was around horses and stuff like that. So, but he's like, yeah, they're very good at reading people, and they've always never really liked me, because for him, it's like they can tell a good person, and if they're running from him, which this horse did, he's like, yeah, I'm kind of proves I'm a bad person. The fact is that horse kind of came out of nowhere. I was like, where did that horse come from? It's got shoes on and everything, but part of me was like, could it be something that dropped in from a different time? They didn't really get caught up in that too. It could be from this era, but the fact is, I'm just like, feels like that could be more present day. I guess it just, I don't know, I guess it just depends, and maybe it's just irrelevant, but nevertheless. Also, Gavin dying was kind of really sucky. I was like, wow, I was like, there's no way they're going to, like, let that stay. But still, like, Josh, for that moment, having to deal with, like, the fact is his dad died in front of him. It's like, yeah, he's like, I'm lucky to have this family. Like, I'm lucky you're my son. I'm lucky to have this family I am. He's like, despite my current circumstances, I do believe I am lucky to have all of you. And it's like, tell your sister and your mom that I love them. And it sucks, you know? That things came down to that. But luckily, the machine got brought back online because of Judah working with Veronica, they couldn't get the tree off that's blocking the water, but lo and behold, like as Judah calls them, like Old Spice, because I was like, I get it, because of the Old Spice commercials, but it's like, yeah, it was actually Lucas who got, with the help of his newfound horse buddy, ended up removing the log, and it's like, hey, she's like, I thought you had, he's like, yeah, he's like, things can change, people can change, so kind of embracing that change. I haven't loved this. Like, yeah, if I have a son, it's going to be a Lucas Jr., but if we have a daughter, I've always been fond of the name Ella. I was like, that's really sweet. I was expecting Lily, but still. So that worked out. Luckily, the machine came back online. Izzy and E went through, not just them, Ty, and then I'm about to call me Eli, Levi, and I'm like, okay, once again, timey-wimey this. And then oh, where's your dad? It's like, oh, here's Gavin, he's okay. So, that's my thing of like, I can't tell from Josh's reaction whether it's like, oh, dad was okay the entire time, or is it like oh, I remember dad actually died, and I remember that pain, and, oh God, thank God you're alive, dad. He didn't necessarily have that reaction, so I don't know if it's a thing of the moment they went through the portal, because they already did what they did, time changed. So it's like, okay, cool, we're not here with an Izzy and because this is the time travel things I'm thinking of. It's not like a paradox where it's like, oh, there's another even Izzy. It's like, no, the moment they enter this timeline, they replace the versions of themselves in whatever length of capacity they're there. So the moment they came through the time, now that the timeline had been changed, it had went on like it's if Eve and Izzy had been there the entire time, and so they just basically replaced the versions of themselves that was there. Same thing for Levi and oh God, Ty. Once again, not unless they are replacing their dead versions of themselves because they originally did die, but because of the time, once again, but it's the whole loop of it. It's like, oh God, it's so confusing. Because like, I just don't. I guess the writers didn't even want to answer it too, because it's like, don't worry about it. I'm like, I am neurotic enough to focus on that. The moment it happened, I was like, he's just perfectly fine. But it's like, you remember, but he's like, yeah, I got your message. So it's like, obviously, so it has to imply like that never happened, and they were just like, okay, well, we're gonna sit here at the machine and wait for them to get back, because maybe they disappeared when they went through the portal. They had disappeared from when they had changed things. So Gavin and them made it through the whole tunnel situation, avoided the lizard, did all that, and we were like, okay, and now we got the machine online. All we have to do is wait, and all of a sudden, like, they're back. Oh, my brain hurts. I don't know. Like I said, I'm too neurotic to just let that go. I'm not. I'm just going to focus on it too much. It's like, because I enjoy timey-wiminess. I love time travel, so understanding it is something I love too. And I'm always fascinated by time travel rules. So I'm not fully sure how that all works. Once again, the show's just like, shut up and leave it alone. But I'm like, I can't. So I'll try and push past it, but it's like, oh, hey, that all worked out. Oh, we're good. Everything worked out on that front. It's like, yep. So, I guess we're all good. It's like, cool. The machine's well. The fact of the matter is, James has been tied up. Pada's going to like be holding him. Ty's going to talk to Pada about keeping James in the village, keeping him locked up. I'm sure right next to Kira. So it's like, okay, cool. All we got to do is fix the machine, set the machine right, and we're all going to go home. We get a little bit with Sam. Oh, God, I'm blanking on her name now. The lady that, like, right. Maybe she's been in the background the entire time, but, like, she had dialogue with Riley last episode, and now she's, like, talking to Sam. It's like, yo, thanks for, like, getting us through all this. Like, if you ever, need anything, don't be afraid to call me. It's like, it's my cell phone number, but it's like, I don't know if it's going to work, but, in case it does, I'm like, hey, look at you, Sam, still got it. Because he finally did talk to Riley about the whole situation of, like, what happens to our family now? It's like, well, we'll figure it out. We have to. He's like, I was so focused on thinking that if I got back that we could fix this family, but he's like, maybe it's just not meant to be. And he just finally was kind of willing to kind of let go. So, but Riley's like, what about our family? It's like, you could be a family even, it's going to be a new dynamic, but I think they'll find their way through it. So Probably don't want Riley to know about that little exchange at the end there, though. It's like, Dad. I mean, it's like, well, there's divorce was filed, and who knows if you guys can work it out or not. I did skip over the Scott situation with the little girl from last episode. Now in this episode, she does seem like more of a little girl. Because last episode I was like, is she like a preteen or a teen? It seems like she is like straight up like a little girl. It might be like a preteen to little girl, but regardless. Scott took her to get her inhaler, and because he wanted to know about the locket, and it's like, okay, she unlocked it. Is a picture of her mom, which is the same person he was meant to go get an interview with, and you're like, okay. Which part of me wonders, like, could there be a correlation between her and Gavin? Could we find out later on Gavin has a sister? But I'm like, no, because the people who sent Levi here wanted him to kill. Well, I have to take that back. They might not have expressly wanted Levi to kill James. That might have been his own, like that might have been him freestyling. They might have had other plans, but because he made it clear when he was talking to Izzy, like, oh yeah, like I kind of hijacked this whole thing and kind of screwed over some very powerful people to get back down here. So it could be the thing of they didn't want James dead. They wanted Levi to kind of control the situation, but Levi just hijacked the whole plan and decided to go up for full-blown death and revenge type of situation. So... But he was very cagey about the details. I was like, all right, that feels like that's set up for the future, that he's kind of getting very like, it doesn't matter, kind of brushing the details aside. But I'm like, no, it seems like it probably will and does matter because it seems like it probably is super important. Well, lo and behold, it is, because it turns out the group he belongs to is the same group that little girl's mom is a part of. Like, whether she's like the head honcho of it, she might actually be the person that Levi worked with. So the fact is that Scott was going to have an interview with her, and obviously this was like back in the, 80s and 90s. Well, it was mainly in the 90s that Levi was working with them. So now I'm like, huh. Because he covers up his tattoo, so it's like, okay, so they're at the center of all of this. They don't seem like they have anything to do with Lazarus. They might be their own separate thing. Whereas Lazarus is in the future working on all this, maybe this particular group is from the past working on all of this. But like I said, it could be a thing of she's actually Gavin's sister. But then it's like, because James talks about her later, but it could be that she's from the future and ends up... I mean, because we've seen with Aaron, there's been so many cases of like Aaron and Caroline of like, hey, we end up in the past. Because that's where we need to be to do what we need to do. So she could easily be Gavin's sister from the future who traveled back in time to the past. And, maybe she's kind of in a very similar situation to Gavin. It makes me wonder, did James... Because James like, oh, you'll know soon enough when you meet her. So it has to be someone Gavin has never met over the course of this show. I also love the reveal that little girl knows English, especially because Scott was saying something and she shrugged her shoulder. I'm like, you understand English, don't you? And then he immediately said it after. I was like, yeah, there's no way she would have responded if she didn't know. And then she immediately speaks perfectly English afterwards. You're like, okay, I see what it is. It's like, but why hide that? Why pretend like you did? It's like, right, you don't know if you can trust him, and Scott proved himself to be someone trustworthy. But she's like, hey, help me find my mom and I'll tell you what this is all about. Which I don't know if Levi is going to be too quick to share some of the detail. He probably doesn't know who that girl is. Not unless, once again, I brought this up last episode, not unless that little girl is, her mom isn't important in all of this, but maybe it eventually becomes her. So the person that Levi eventually works for is that little girl, but she hasn't gone back to her time to, because she was like, apparently, like, this was like a military base or something, and he's like, how did a military base end up here? So it's either she's going to grow up to become the person that Levi was working under, or her mom is. So because because Levi was working with like the military to make this all happen, like the government / military to kind of make this happen. So once again, what their end result is, who knows? But we got the situation with James at the end where it's like he's bugging out and he decides, you know what? Screw all this. He gets free, takes the gun from Gavin. It's like, I'm going to go through, but it's not even going to be Project Blue Moon anymore. I made the mistake of getting sentimental. I was also trying to save the future. Nah, fuck that. I should have been the one taking control of everything. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to fix everything, and I'm going to take control, power tripping type of thing. I'm also going to undo everything with your, me doing this will make it so that you won't exist and your children will never exist. But it's like, hey, that's the price to pay, because love and familiarity, family and all that, it's a weakness. And it's like, it took me away from my true goal, what I should have been aiming for. So he was going to undo everything. And it's like, oh, what about Caroline? And he's like, oh, sacrifices have to be made. And I'm like, I don't know if that conversation was implying he killed Caroline like I thought he might have, or is it just being like, oh, like, I thought you were going to be a better person for Caroline. It's like, yeah, but whatever. I don't know. That conversation, the fact is he was like, sacrifices had to be made. I mean, that could just be in general about like, right, leaving this be, and maybe I don't ever get together with her, or maybe I go back in time, end up killing her so we never get together and you're never born, kind of erasing you that way. But it almost sounded like he was implying like he killed her, but I don't know. I wish the conversation had gone on a little longer on that front, because I'm like, it felt still ambiguous on whether or not he actually did, or whether he's just talking about the pretense of, hey, I need to make sure I never get with her so that you're never born. I was actually wondering, like, 'cause I thought what the ending was going to be is like, man, there's going to be a certain time and Gavin's going to end up pushing James through and they're both going to get warped. But it's like, no, turns into a struggle, bullets start flying, you're like, oh, this isn't good for the machine, which then portals start popping up all over the sky and you're like, cool, anything and anyone can end up falling through. So that gives a lot of creative licenses of like whatever you want to throw. So it is a thing of kind of what I've wondered before. It's like we're just getting a more heightened version of just like everything's collecting in this time period. This is going to be like the centerfold of just everything getting dropped in, and potentially anyone from any different point in time, because there's no clear picture of where any one of these portals open to. They all just open to very varying points in history and time. I'm curious about that interesting aspect of like Gavin was on the other side of the portal and he ended up shooting his dad. I was like, I thought the bullet was going to go through the portal and end up wherever, but it's like, no, I guess he shot around the energy that is the portal. So there's that window of like, hey, this is where the portal is. You have to go directly into that. But if you kind of have the bullet aimed off the side, it won't get like warped into the portal. Shot and killed his dad, which his dad then dropped the knowledge of, hey, you have a sister. Yeah, you'll see her soon enough. But the fam came back to check on him. But the problem with that, though, is got Moore's journal. Eve gets stuck on the other side and gets sucked through. She passed on Moore's journal beforehand, but now it's like that was the last shot. The machine is off. Eve is in God knows what time frame. So it's like, cool, this family is separated yet again, but Eve's back, saying like, right, we found each other before, we'll find each other again. It's like, oh boy. Because of course, obviously this was never going to have like, it's all honky-dory. It's like, okay, yeah, there's enough time in this episode for everything to go wrong, because it will go wrong, because it can never go down perfectly. So it's like, cool, so what do we do? Well, we have to go back to clearing, figure out a plan on how to handle all this. And they see a giant footprint, and I was like, that looks like a dinosaur footprint. And then in front of them is a giant T-Rex. I'm like, yeah, I get my Cage of Eden after all. Because if you didn't know, because I was an idiot and didn't realize what time frame they were in, I was immediately, because I don't know, in my stupid head, I was thinking like, oh, like, because I was so caught up in thinking like, oh my God, this is going to be like Cage of Eden because they're going back in time and stuff like that. Cage of Eden isn't, well, I actually don't know. I've never finished Cage of Eden, but obviously it's like more like Lost, but spoilers, there's dinosaurs on the island instead of just like people and the smoke monster. But there's other mysteries to it. Once again, I never finished the series, so I never found out what the full mysteries of, whether there was a time travel element to that or not. Tangent and all that aside. But the fact, I mean, obviously, even Lost had the time traveling island aspect. But regardless, well, moving island / time traveling island. But it's like, once again, my point is just like, yes, I technically get my cake and get to eat it too. By kind of now having dinosaurs in this. Once again, we have no idea what landed here. But it's definitely going to lead to a lot of time shenanigans. Definitely could probably lead to time as a whole kind of finally breaking apart with just everything going possibly wrong. So the show is coming back for a third season. I had seen that, but I'd also had heard some reports saying that this might be potentially the final season. Well, I was just skimming through some reports. I think I skimmed through like a Collider article that I think was referencing a Deadline article talking about that maybe and I saw another article referencing this too, that this next season might only be 6 episodes, or at the very, like, it was like they only ordered 6 episodes because apparently there's going to be like a lot of restructuring to like the plot and the story. So they might speed, like, there might be a lot of stuff that technically happens off screen that you have to catch up with going into this third season. Once again, what I was reading is it didn't seem like it's official, but it seems like it's a high probability that the next season will be the last season. And I can kind of feel that. So reading a TV Line article, it seems like they're trying to get ahead of, because it's been something that's kind of been brewing for a while about a writer's strike. So they're trying to get as much of that kind of out there. Apparently, I think they're start filming, I think I was reading next month in Australia, and had no idea the show was filmed in Australia. But one of the EPs and I think one of the creative forces behind it was like, yeah, nothing's definitive. We're not going into this fully like planning to wrap it up. We're trying to see because nothing's been official yet. The moment they're told like, yes, this will be the last season, then they'll wrap it up. Yes, there's only like the 6 episode order, but there's room for more depending on like what ends up happening with the network's decision to just what the future holds. So nothing's set in stone. Even the plan, the exact wording was, it's not officially planned for us to wrap this up. We just want to tell a satisfying story and see how things play out. So this next scene, once again, even if it is officially the final season, if it's not, whether we are just still getting this 6 episodes, will we end up getting more? If we end up getting more, I'm sure it'd only be 10 and not 30. The first season was 10. This season ended up being 14, so we could still end up going back to down to 10. I don't know. It's still up in the air how this all play out. Either way, I'd be so excited to see where. I don't know if you'd wrap all this up in one more season, especially a shortened season like that. You'd have to legitimately restructure a lot. So now I'm wondering, because I could see this maybe like, if that's the thing too, like you don't know if this show would get a 4th season. Because I feel like there's still so much plot and so many elements they introduced this season. There's the sister element and everything with Lazarus, like that's still open, but then there's the group that Levi's a part of, that little girl that Scott's like friends with now is a part of. Their involvement in all of this. Obviously Eve's flown into whatever time period she's in and have some fun with that, and what plops down in 10,000 BC. There's so many elements at play here that I feel like you probably couldn't wrap it up in one season. Probably need that 4th season to do that, but we'll ultimately have to wait to see. Keeping an ear out, or eye and ear out, just to see what the ultimate decision is for this show. But regardless of whichever way the wind blows, I'm excited to see what they have in store for us for 3rd season, final season or not. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.